Hello there Reason users, PoohBear here and welcome to my channel. And today what we're going to look at, where we can take a knob like this, which obviously changes the pattern because there's only one remote behind all your patterns. And this sometimes can be a little bit clumsy, especially if you're playing live, or even when you're composing, you want to be able to switch between patterns quite quickly. Using the mouse can actually be a little bit slow as well. And ideally, we'd want to set them up to these buttons. So as you can see, I can actually use my buttons to very quickly switch between my patterns. Now, before we go ahead, this knob could be any knob you're controlling within reason. So I could be controlling, say, the knob at the top on the actual combinator itself, and we can actually use these buttons to say where that knob's actually going to be. So it could be that if you're in a live situation, you might say, hey, when I play the verse, I want the cutoff to be in this position, and when I'm doing the bridge, I want the cutoff in this position, and the chorus, it doing something totally different. And so by using buttons, you can quickly get to them parameters very quickly, rather than trying to dial in, especially, depending on what your live set's like. So let's just jump straight in. This is the combinator patch, which you're going to download. Very straightforward. It is actually a combinator version 1. I know I'm using Reason 12, but this is version 1. So theoretically, Reason 10 users and above can use it, because obviously the players. But if you're using what I stated before, where we can control any kind of control, obviously it would be Reason 4 users and above be able to use it. As default, I've actually put in the drum sequencer, and I'm actually using the Kong. Obviously you can replace and put whatever player device you want in, and obviously any instrument you want in here as well, which we will do in a second, because you have to configure it up when you do actually start swapping things around. So we will also get into the technical side of really how this fully works, because you probably need to know how to configure your MIDI controller up to actually make it work. Just because this is a Nectar, it doesn't have to be a Nectar. It can be, as I say, any MIDI controllers to actually do this with as well. So let's look at actually the MIDI controller side of things. So if we actually come down here, you may notice that I've got myself a little mod panel, and this is actually what we're using to do the pattern changes. So what you have to do, obviously I say if you've got a Nectar, my mappings as default are actually mapped out to these particular keys. So as you can see, as I'm clicking the button, I'm actually selecting a button up here. Now obviously for anyone else, you might need to right click and quickly zoom in. Boop. We can right click and we can obviously do an edit remote override. So you can do your edit remote override. Sorry, it's gone over this side of the screen. And you can obviously then choose your button and you can sort of set it up that way. Once you've actually set that, you shouldn't have to touch anything else. I will go over what this stuff is doing, but you shouldn't have to touch anything else. As I say, it should now be working. So what happens if I don't want to have my drum sequencer and I want to have, say, a different player in here altogether? Well, we can actually do that, and I'm going to do that quite simply. Let's put in this sequence patch. So I'm going to put in this patch in here. So here we go, got sequences, and obviously at the moment if I'm pressing my buttons, we can see the top one's changing, but obviously the bottom one's not changing. So what we need to do is obviously go into edit, and then I'm going to click on sequence there, and let me zoom in again so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And in fact, I'm going to move my my MIDI controller out the way. And over here, we're going to click on add, and you're going to want to use CV1, because that's a piece of cable I'm using on the back of the combinator, which I'll show you about in a little bit later. The target is going to go to pattern select. So that's our pattern selector, and I'm actually going from pattern 1 to 8. You can configure it up to go for a lot more patterns, but you have to do a lot more configuration within the combinator itself. So now theoretically, I'm going to now go to my controller and I'm going to start clicking on my controller. So if I click number 2, here's number 2, 3, 4, and you can see we're changing both patterns at the same time, which is really cool. So very quickly as well, for the technical side of things, as I say, what we're doing here on the back, we're just taking our cables out, and that's actually going down into this multipole, which is like a bit like a multiplexer. It's taking the poly signals and it's merging it into one. So it works as a multiplexer, and I think of it as a bit of a sample and hold device as well, because while that gate is open, we can have a signal coming in here, which will obviously be output in here, but as soon as that gate closes, it remembers that last signal, so it holds it. And it'll be true for all of these. So what we do is we click on our button, We open up the gate. We've got another voltage which is coming in here, which is coming from the RVL1, which I'll talk about in a second. And we send that out, and that happens to be the voltage equivalent of pattern number 1. That's the equivalent of pattern number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, and so on. So if you wanted to do 16, you need to have 2 of these, and you need to do the division by 16. But as I say, that's a different kettle of fish, and that's for the advanced users. So if we have a quick look at the RVL, and quickly flip around to the front on this one. There's a couple of different ways you can actually configure this up. I've actually gone for the route of where I'm actually going to get the RVL to push out 1 volt, and then I'm going to scale it down. So you can scale it down by using these knobs at the top here. And obviously if I hover on this, this should all be scaled down to exactly the same figure that you can see outputting at the top, because we're scaling it from 1 volt. So it would be, when you scale from different voltages, obviously it'd be a different number. So this is equivalent of picking pattern number 1. You might be thinking, why isn't pattern number 1 0? Because 0 would be no pattern at all. So at the moment, we do not have the option to say no pattern because we've only got 8 here, but you could say, okay, I'm going to go from 0 and I only want patterns 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And if you've only got 8 buttons, you've got 9 buttons, you can also go off and do something else, but that's a different kettle of fish again. So that's how that's simply working. We're just taking this voltage, we're pushing it into the mole pole is then taking it, and if we then scroll up the back, he says, I need to zoom out and then scroll reason up the back. That's a problem, my zoom program zooms as well, scrolls as well. So I'm actually putting the CV in here, and we're working it in unipolar mode. And as I say, simply on the front, you saw how we configured that earlier, which was quite straightforward. You just click on it and you just say, oh, that's my pattern, and you say your min and your max. Now, finally, what we can actually do as well, don't think you're limited to, so I've got like 2 different players in there, so let me quickly grab this patch here. I'm going to grab this patch here, I'm going to drop that patch down there. There we go, a little bit of respire. I'm going to close it off. I'm going to grab this sequences and put it on top of that respire. And so now I'm going to control the drums and I'm going to control sequences at the same time from the same controller. And that's it really. That's all there is to it. As I say, I'll put all the links in the description where you can download this combinator from. So all it leaves me to say is thank you for watching, and bye for now.